Greetings. I'm your host, Sundiata Keita Cha-Jua, and this is RealTalk, History as a Weapon for Black Liberation. Today we have as our guest, Dr. Ajamu Baraka. Dr. Baraka is an internationally recognized Pan-African human rights activist, writer, organizer, and geopolitical analyst with over 50 years of movement work in the U.S. and internationally. Ajamu is on the executive committee of the U.S. Peace Council, the leadership body of the United National Anti-War Coalition, the steering committee of the Blackest Black Coalition, and he is a founder of the Black Alliance for Peace and currently the chairperson of BAP's leadership body. He is a senior editor and contributing columnist for the Black Agenda Report and a contributor to a number of news and opinion outlets. He was awarded the U.S. Peace Memorial 2019 Peace Prize and the Serena Shreem Award for his uncompromising integrity in journalism. Baraka was the Green Party's vice presidential candidate with Jill Stein in the 2016 presidential race. He holds a BA from Clark Atlanta University. He holds a PhD in political science from Clark Atlanta University in Atlanta, Georgia. Let me now bring on Brother Baraka. Brother, it's an honor and a pleasure to have you on my show.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here also, but I got to correct a couple of things because I don't want people to think I'm perpetrating. So, on my wiki, what's that called? The Wikipedia
page, yeah.
Yeah, so they got me as a PhD, and I try to change that, but no, I'm not like you, brother. I don't have a doctor. I don't have a doctorate. I got a street doctorate at this point.
That's right. You got a doctorate in struggle, brother.
There you go.
Lived experience in fighting for our people. There you go.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So we try and keep this space informal. So I try to go with brother and sister for the most part, our first names. Now, the first thing I want to say to you is how much I appreciate your work.
Appreciate it.
Especially the commitment to, and this is a quote I think from BAP's website, to recapture and redevelop the historic anti-war, anti-apartheid, anti-imperialist, and pro-peace positions of the radical Black movement, unquote. So now, as with all my guests, I want you to be comprehensive, right? I want you to feel the sense to spread out and contextualize your answers, but at the same time, I want to urge you to also be as succinct as possible. What I'd like to be able to do is sometime around 8 o'clock, 8:05, go to the questions from the audience, or actually participants, and have you begin to engage those. So that requires that first hour you be, somewhat tight. Second, I'm a devotee of William Cross's Negrescence theory in terms of African-American identity formation, what used to be called the Negro to Black conversion process. Mm-hmm. So because I am so much into Cross's methodology and theory, I always start my interviews by asking the guests to talk about how they became who they are, right? Revolutionaries aren't born, they're made through struggle, conscious, shaping. So you're born and grew up on the historic South Side of Chicago. You also fought in the Vietnam War. So can you discuss for us how you're being raised on Chicago's South Side during the mid-50s, 60s, and 70s, service in Vietnam, and your class background? How did those things influence your intellectual decisions, political science as a area of study? And more importantly, well, equally importantly, your social movement commitments to a radical Black international politics. Now, if you can, I'd like you to be able to talk very specifically about experiences, observations, mentors, readings, and processes that contributed to you selecting and developing that set of intellectual interests and political engagements.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to start, because as you are absolutely correct. It's a process. It's a process for development, for people who find themselves in the situation that we have found ourselves in North America, in or captured by a settler colonial project, a project that has at its core the objective to basically make us Negroes, to ensure that we will be orderly slaves. And so some of us remain at that level. Some of us turn into what I call niggers. I was a nigger for about 3 years.
Okay,
Some of us,
explain what you mean by that.
they're growing up on the south side of Chicago. You get subjected to all kinds of influences. And, while my family was a good race family, with good race politics, if you will, in terms of, Garveyism and the Nation of Islam, and pride in ourselves and uplift and serving the community. As a young brother, and some, many times young sister, you get caught up in other kind of stuff, and so, as a teenager growing up on the south side of Chicago, because where I stayed at, not only was I on the south side of Chicago, we ended up in some of the roughest communities on the south side. People who are from Chicago would know when I talk about growing up on 43rd and Berkeley. Okay, that this was a place where we had to. It wasn't one of those what they call it kitchenette apartments, where they cut up a house and we shared like between three families. We had one, and back in those days, as y'all remember, our families were pretty large. We were considered to have a small family. There was five of us, okay, and all of us had to share one bathroom, okay. And so this is where I really began to see and experience the contradictions of what it means to be an African in the U.S. Now I started there because while we was having those kind of experiences, there was a commonality among all of us. We knew we were poor. We knew no one cared about us. But because of sort of the sort of class blend of many of our families, I had also in our family a petty bourgeois element. Okay, and so my uncle went into real estate. He bought a house. They bought a building that was on 72nd and Vernon. And, because of the whole family thing, we all ended up there. My grandfather, two of my uncles, and my uncle's mother-in-law and her sister, and they gave us the basement apartment. It
So
was
this
an
is kind
unfinished.
of like a classic Black extended family situation.
Exactly. But this is where the other element came in. So we ended up in the basement, a semi-finished basement. And in this community, even though it was a working class community, we, for the first time, really began to experience a class difference because we were absolutely dirt poor, you
Okay.
know? And so even though people around us were also working class, for us, they kind of seemed privileged, you know?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. And because of that too, the school that we ended up going to, because we were poor, for some of the teachers, not all of them, 'cause we had some good teachers, they almost expected you because you were like poor to act a certain kind of way.
Yeah.
And sometimes you began to act out just how they want you to act. Okay.
That's right.
So what happened was I began to I began to develop a class consciousness that it wasn't just about us being Africans, but there was something about this class structure too that was very, very interesting. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that stayed with me. And that stayed with me as I went through what I call my nigger phase, which was I started about 15 and a half, and, got into stuff that a lot of young brothers got into for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But luckily, I came out the other end. and coming out the other end meant I had to make certain sacrifices. So when I hit 18, I had a few things that happened to me, and it became clear to me I had to change. I
Okay.
was already becoming political. Okay. I mean, the person that had the biggest
What
impact
was
on us,
making you become political?
the person who had the biggest impact on all of us in the streets was Chairman Fred.
Ah, okay.
Okay. And while some of us weren't prepared to make the real sacrifice to transform ourselves at that moment, and to take up the chant, I am a revolutionary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The politics that we've been exposed to were transformative. Okay. So it was Fred Hampton on that side, another side, it was also the sort of the nationalist elements that were there too. Haki Mahabuti and others who had these centers where you go and get exposed all kind of Black history and all of that. So this stuff is percolating in our heads. Okay.
Now, did you ever go to the Topographical Center,
Yes.
run by the RNA?
Yes. Now there were. Yeah. Now, are you talking about the one that's on like 75th and
Absolutely. Yeah,
yes,
yeah, yeah,
yes.
yeah,
The
yeah,
first time
yeah.
I went there, brother, the first time I went there, I was so freaked out. I mean, it's like I felt like that that we would they're gonna come get us the very next morning. It's like because they talked about the different railroads or how those connected to the military installations and yes,
The gun, the windows that they could use guns in Cabrini Greens, and yeah, 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 yeah. The whole nine. It was like you
that was
said.
part of it. That was
It
very that was and they knew how to relate to us. You know, they knew how to relate to us. So all of that was percolating as we were trying to transform and this and that. So 18, I ended up. You remember the lottery, okay,
yeah,
for the
yeah,
draft. My lottery number was 9, which meant basically I was going to be drafted.
yeah.
So they gave you an option. You could wait to be drafted and get sent straight to infantry and straight to Vietnam for 2 years, or you can enlist for 3 years. And they had all kind of incentives to do that. So me and two of my friends had a thing called a buddy plan. You all can join together, and they will guarantee that y'all will go through basic training together. So me and two of my other brothers who were trying to do the same thing I was trying to do. I was trying to get out. I knew basically, comrade, that if I stayed in that environment, I wasn't going. I was going to prison. I wasn't going to live.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
and I was at that point committed to transforming myself. So we had to leave, and we left and went down to what they call Little Vietnam, Polk, Louisiana.
Mm,
Yes, that's where they trained the brothers, and then you went straight to Vietnam. So we went to the basic training,
right.
okay, but then we didn't have to go to infantry because again another part of the guarantee was you can choose or any of the military, the infantry, artillery, all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So we went into the military. Now I didn't fight. That's part of it because you also can get a guarantee of where you'll be stationed.
Ah,
So I went to Germany.
okay.
This is in the beginning of March. This is March 1972. And at that point, too, the U.S. military was drawing down. They already lost the war. They knew it, and they were drawing down. So, but I know it's long, but I got to
No,
set
no,
this up
no,
because
brother. Believe me,
yeah,
this is essential because we have young folks, and they need to understand the process by which one transforms oneself, right?
yes,
In the
yes,
socio-historical context in which people of our generation made those leaps. So yeah,
yes,
please.
because it was in the military that now I get exposed to directly to get exposed to a whole another element of brother. So I had some exposure to some political folks, but now I got exposed to some brothers who were super advanced, and that was the beginning of the real process of social transformation. Okay, and you remember back in those days, you went basically 3 places to be radicalized. You could do it in the universities.
Yeah.
You went to jail. You can definitely get radicalized, or in the military.
Military, absolutely.
You know.
Absolutely.
So I got involved in the military. I was part of the GI movement. I was an organizer in the military, and that meant developing certain kinds of specific kinds of skills. And that was really the real beginning of my political involvement in terms of really, preparing ourselves for what we knew we had to do once we came out.
So now, once you were politicized and you came out, did you immediately get involved in movement organizations, or did you seek, was it student movements? What did you do?
No, I came out with the intent because we prepared ourselves while we were in the military. We were doing work in the military. We were following very closely all of the events and developments that was taking place. We formed an informal sort of chapter of the African Liberation Support Committee doing,
Okay.
African liberation support work
Right.
in Europe. Okay, we protested when we found out that at that point the U.S. through NATO was in fact training Portuguese pilots who were engaged in the fight, engaged in trying to uphold colonialism in Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, and Angola. So a lot of people forget about that or don't even know that the role that NATO played in that process. So I was at that point attached to a aviation company, an elite one, and they were the ones that were doing the training, and we shut it down for a while at least until we had to succumb or in essence go to prison. So yeah, we did all that. So when I came out, my intent was in fact to join the movement. It was also to take advantage of the GI Bill.
Absolutely.
So I went south. Where I first started off in Florida because at that time my wife was Bahamian, so I went to the Bahamas first for a few months, and then my entry point back into the U.S. was through Miami. And because of the Bahamian orientation and my orientation toward revolutionary Pan-Africanism, the whole Caribbean piece and all of that was very, very, very much a part of where I was at that point.
Plus, it's
and so I ended up
moment.
Caribbean
is popping at that moment.
It was, and so the organization that at that point was developing and seemed to be the most attractive to me was when of course I was following Brother Kwame Ture, but when we had a chance to meet and he explained some things and all of that, because my only hesitation was, we some of us we were a little hesitant about the whole class thing and the emphasis on the students, but at that point the All African People's Revolutionary Party had a formula where something like 60-40, 60% student work, 40% work, community stuff. So that was the formula that I embraced, and I went into the party in just like very beginning of 1978. But also went into school and started building some of the student formations also. So I was in Miami, Florida for a couple of years, and I got involved in a lot of different resistance, including what people refer to as the Arthur McDuffie so-called riots.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So then from there, I ended up in Tampa, Florida, at the University of South Florida, and then I ended up where I really wanted to go, which was in Atlanta. And at that point, it was called Atlanta University. This was at that point. This is what we consider to be the most radical Black political science department.
Yeah. Mac Jones.
And radical with Mac Jones and folks in the country. And in fact, I had an opportunity to go other places, but I was told by people I respected that I needed to be in Atlanta, and that's where I went. And that was 1982.
So this is somewhat a follow-up, but this historian by the name of George Roudet, he's working class historian, Marxist out of Britain, and in his book on crowds, he talks about two ways in which we acquire knowledge. One is what he calls inherent knowledge. That is to say, through socialization, through the
Mm,
culture, right? Being enculturated into a particular ethnicity slash nationality and their way of life, being enculturated into a class, right? The other way is derived, and that's through focus, learning, and reflection. And so I want you to talk about both. You've kind of talked about the inherent. So I want you to probably focus on the derived, and particularly, I've seen things that you've written that talk about the influence of W.B. Du Bois and a Military cabal. Can you focus on what you got from them and how you've been able to use it in your development of organizations and coalitions within the movement,
mm.
as well as your
No, yeah,
fundamental analysis?
yeah, no, you know, the experience at Atlanta University and being in places in spaces where you had where W.B. Du Bois was at. For example, you might remember that you remember the Institute of the Black World.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely.
yes, and the building that they were in used to be the Du Bois House. So
Right.
I spent a lot of time there, and just being exposed to the the materials that we had to grapple with as graduate students. I was in grad school at that time. So of course, the independent thinking of Amilcar Cabral that was very instrumental in helping to remind people that as you grapple with all this theory, you have to remind yourselves that no matter how attractive other people's realities are, historical realities, social realities, you can't be effective in advancing the struggle for liberation of your people unless you have an understanding of the specific social conditions that you are trying to transform.
That's right.
That's very important because so many people are getting caught up, especially people who didn't have a lot of practical experience. They get caught up in some of the theory that they were being exposed to, and it caused them to believe that they had certain understandings, insights that they didn't have. In fact, what they ended up doing was it meant that they were going to repeat mistakes that others had made. And so that was Cabral was very important. Another, of course, Nkrumah was always important, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
what helped ground my revolutionary Pan Africanism was not only Nkrumah, and in particular Nkrumah's class struggle in Africa, but
Yeah.
also Walter Rodney's
Are you
the
underdeveloped Africa?
exactly. So those were
Yes.
some pivotal pieces for us in terms of providing sort of a scientific analysis of how Africa got in the place it was, but because it was grounded also in political economy, and that for us was a framework that you had to grapple with in
Mm-hmm.
order to really understand what was unfolding in the world. So that understanding, and then the understanding that we had a responsibility as young, budding, radical intellectuals, not to stay at the level of abstraction, that we had to engage in practice in order to experiment with what we thought we understood. And so, even as a grad student, you might remember one of the things of what the Atlanta University experience was. They used to call Mac Jones the picketing professor, okay? Because Mac was always involved in local struggles, okay? He was
Mm-hmm.
always taking to task the local leadership. And so, when I came in and others, we hit it off very well because we were about organizing the students also and bringing students out of the classroom into the streets also. And we were encouraged, in fact, to do that. And that's what we did. We got involved in some local struggles, some of the earliest anti-gentrification struggles in the country,
Mm-hmm.
right there in Atlanta. Um, and we, of course, continue with our anti-apartheid work and then Central America solidarity work, and organizing or trying to support local struggles because at that point too, the Negroes were just beginning to move against poor people in Atlanta. And because so many of the organizers in Atlanta and other places found their way into the local governmental bureaucracy, it sort of decapitated leadership
Oh,
on
absolutely.
the community level.
That's right. Neo-colonial. My
Yeah.
student, former student, he's now a professor in his own right. Dr. Augustus Wood has a book coming out with North Carolina on gentrification and on the treachery of that body of neo-colonialists who ran Atlanta from the 70s into the current moment. Um, so, in fact, I'm sure he's used some of the material that you were reading as primary sources for that analysis. But one of the first things he gets involved with is the gentrification struggle, but also the labor struggles that Black people led in the city of Atlanta, which were numerous in that period. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. There was black folks involved with at that time. There was a lot of organizing with the Jobs with Justice folks. The Atlanta Labor Council was pretty effective. And so those labor struggles were really important up into the 90s when at that point I was working with the Black Workers for Justice,
Okay.
and we were attempting to support the organization of workers at the Atlanta airport. And that was a very, very important labor struggle also. So yes, that was a very important component in Atlanta, really across the South, because as you can't understand Black politics unless you really understand what unfolded in the South, because you had both the invasion of Northern capital
Yeah.
and foreign
And
capital,
international capital. Yeah.
international
Absolutely.
capital. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah.
Look, I got to go to this current question because this is something that bugs the hell out of me. We are at an intense moment of workers rising up across a variety of industries, from fast food to Amazon workers to auto workers to hospital workers to teachers, right? And at the core of many of these labor upsurges are Black folk, particularly Black women, right? At the leadership of a number of these struggles are Black folk. I had a graduate student who's she's actually in psychology, but she was doing some work with me out of history, and so I had her go into St. Louis because she was from St. Louis, and just talk to and do archival research on the relationship between the Black Liberation Movement and the labor upsurge in terms of the fight for 15. And what she found is that, of course, only my old Organization for Black Struggle, led by Jamala Rogers, had any relationship to the labor struggles. And so part of my question, well, let me tell this story a bit. The Ferguson story, Black Lives Matter is a goddamn footnote to that. It was the Black folks who were engaged in the fight for 15 who went into Ferguson immediately after Michael Brown was killed. They laid the basis for those coalitions that were formed, right? Working with OBS, Organization for Black Struggle, and Zaki Baruti's Pan-Africanist movement, right?
Mhm.
But it was those young folks that were engaged in the fight for 15. And everyone tells that story and they pump up these people who come in, you know what I mean? And the media loves them. And then they're put at the head of our movement. But the question I'm trying to get to is this: how the hell do we explain that the masses of our people, the core, the center of our people, are rising up through the labor movement, and the liberation organizations have very few, the nationalist organizations particularly, connections to that movement, and in fact prefer to organize the marginalia rather than the core of the Black
Mm,
community?
mm. It's a very interesting question, and I think it's something we've been trying to grapple with in an honest way. And I think part of the reason why we have not been able to grapple with it in an honest way is that some of those same forces that have been comfortable with attempting to organize, as you call the marginite. What was that term?
Marginalia
Yeah,
goes on the
uh,
periphery.
you're right. So they have not really seriously critiqued their own practice. You know, we talk about this dialectic of theory and practice,
Right.
and under the concept of praxis itself. One would assume that when you engage a certain kind of work, that you would then critically sum up that work, critically analyze
Right.
that work, determine where you make mistakes and make adjustments. But I think that approach, that those kind of tools and skills that you have to do that, for various reasons, they became very slim in some of those formations. So they kind of got
Lack
stuck
of
in a rut.
physical education. Because again, I'm the same age as you, but the core development from 14 on was what you described under that Black Power generation. So why don't these newer formations understand that you have to analyze and correct mistakes, and that has to be done dialectically through honest struggle?
Well, what I'm referring to is not even the new groups. I'm coming to the new groups.
Oh,
I'm talking about the older groups that have not been serious about analyzing their practice, and they got stuck into a rut, doing things the same way, and that's why they never grew. And because of the discontinuity of our struggle, that occurred as a consequence of the counterinsurgency, the counter-revolutionary process of the 1970s. These new elements started developing, and then if you look at if you okay, we look at what came out of Ferguson.
mhm,
There was no foundation there in terms of how you actually really do this stuff. You know,
right,
the groups that could have maybe provided some foundation, they were few and far in between. I mean, the organization that you were a part of, that's one of the few that was trying to seriously develop people.
right.
Okay. But as you know, there wasn't that many around the country, and that's why there was some degree of a more solid foundation before the enemy basically put these other elements in charge of that whole process. Okay, and so that discontinuity wasn't really corrected. You had this emergence of this thing called the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yeah.
It blew up. You had a meeting in
Cincinnati.
Cleveland,
Was it
and
Cleveland or Cincinnati?
basically
Go ahead.
after that, yeah, what happened?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
After that, what happened? What?
Nothing. I mean, really, they began to wage a war on
Yeah, I'm
overactive.
here, and yeah, I'm
You're freezing up periodically. Can you repeat the point you were making?
and right now I don't see you at all.
You
Yeah,
don't?
okay, now we back. I didn't see
I
you
see
for a
you, but
while,
you're
and now
frozen.
you froze. But I would talk, and you let me know if you hear me.
These technical difficulties will pass. Brother Jamu, it might be good if you can hear me to go out and then come back in. Let's see what happens if I remove him and add. Okay, while we're waiting for Brother Jamu to get back on, let me kind of sum up the point that he was making. Is that the older forces that come out of the 60s and 70s were small. Those that survived due to the assaults of COINTELPRO were small and did not do a very good job in terms of summing up their struggle, and that they remained small. And I think that's the critical point, that they did not sum up their struggle, and therefore they didn't grow. And consequently, they were unable to influence these new formations that emerged in the wake of the murder of Michael Brown. Okay, so this is a time in which I can say that it would be good for you to put in questions so that when Brother Baraka comes back, he can have some questions that we can turn to around 8:05 or so. Okay. In the meantime, let me see if I can turn to this and see if there's anything that we can begin to reply to. Anthony D, never forget Arthur McDuffie in South Florida, Overton, Lost City. You know, one of the things we need to think about is that there's probably 3 or 4 years in a row that there are rebellions in Miami. Sometimes it's Liberty City area, sometimes it's Overtown, but that it's a consistent moment of rebellion in the 80s. Cincinnati has a similar history. I think if you go back and you look, in every decade going back into the 1960s for sure, every decade coming forward into about 2010, there's a rebellion in Cincinnati. Right? Let me see what we got. Just listening after this. Yeah, that is a point that we do need better tech support. Um, yeah, you know, it's we've been finding that there's been more and more of these kinds of disruptions. In fact, while I'm here, let me a current peeve that I have. You know, I use a lot of primary documents in teaching my class. And one of the things that I'm finding is that documents that I used to be able to just Google and look up 2, 3 years ago, download, put on the platform that my students could access it. Now I'm finding that I Google those same documents and nothing comes up. I'm beginning to wonder if there is a move afoot to erase some of this essential knowledge about our people on the internet, and what would be the source and how do we explain that. Let me see if I can request that he send me a phone number, and we try to run it through the phone. Okay, so I'll send that, and look for the best. Do you know anything that we can do, Henry?
No, you've just done what I was talking to say do.
Okay. So right there. I'll look for other questions and see if there's things that we can talk about.
A couple of them rolled through while you were looking down. Your thoughts on the League of Revolutionary Black Workers?
Where do you see that? Okay. Okay, I'm looking at David Silberg says one of his favorite books is Detroit, I Do Mind Dying. That is indeed superb work. One of the things that's real interesting is that that brother, and I think the book begins telling this story, that brother named James Jackson, or was it James Johnson, who was a laborer in one of those auto plants, one day came back to work and shot his supervisor. Ken Cockrell, one of the core 7 of the revolutionary, the Dodge Revolutionary Union movements, but specifically the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, would defend this man and get him off, even though he came into work and shot a supervisor and killed him with a rifle. You know, that's the story that opens the book, Detroit, I Do Mind Dying. Yeah, the League's newspaper was the Inner City Voice. Why is dialectical materialism so important to the African struggle, and why wasn't dialectics used in a lot of the organizations during the 60s and like the 70s? You know, one of the pivotal debates, struggles in the 70s was the 73 to 74 debate between the nationalists and Black Marxists. And that debate is covered in the pages of the Black Scholar and in the pages of Black World. So you can go back and look at those articles. But essentially, the nationalists obviously rejected the idea of dialectical materialism. So they're not trying to use that methodology for their organizing or for their PE, for their understanding of how the world is constructed. So that would be one explanation. The other, okay, good. I got Brother Ajamu's phone number. I'm going to call him and we'll go from there.
Hey, brother.
Hey, brother.
I don't know what's going on, man. It's just I was disconnected, and it just my phone is on. Did you call me? You called me through a regular call, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
I tried to come back through Chrome.
And what happened?
It's not loading up. Okay, but now it says I'm connected. Let me try again.
Okay. In the meantime, let me ask the audience this question. Can you guys hear? Can you say something, Brother Baraka?
Testing 1, 2, 3, trying to come in.
Okay. People online, can you put in the chat and let us know if you can hear Brother Baraka? Because this is going to be our backup, the phone, if he's unable to get back on. So let me know in the chat if you can hear him. Okay. Yes, they can hear you. So this will be our backup, brother. So you want to go ahead and proceed?
Okay, yeah. Now it seems like it's trying to come in, but it's taking a long time. So let's go ahead. And
okay, and if you come
if
in,
we
great.
Come in through the studio, that'd be great.
Okay, that sounds good. So do you want to go back and pick up pieces of that argument that you were making?
Well, basically, what I was saying was that the that moment in history with the Ferguson situation was a moment in which there could have been a spark toward the development of a real authentically radical development. Okay, but it was, in my opinion, that moment was undermined and undermined consciously through the whole process of NGO corruption and the what emerged as the hegemony of liberal reformist politics.
Yeah.
The focus was on these things called racial justice. I don't know what that even is.
In a capitalist society,
criminal justice system and all of that. And it's it just stalled out, but it stayed around. It stayed around, and then at a point where it was really about ready to be put to sleep, then you had George Floyd. And here we go again. You had a spontaneous reaction from forces across the country, raising these issues that went even way beyond just George Floyd, because at that point you have the situation with COVID and the disproportionate number of Black people who were dying and negatively impacted, because of the underlying mobility issues and all of that. And so there was a moment there where George Floyd would serve as a convenient symbol, as an entry point, if you will, for a more radical analysis of the entire system itself. But again, that got co-opted when the focus remained on George Floyd. When you look up and you get police involved, and when they wasn't cracking their heads, they were marching with the protesters. It ended up being a sort of soap opera with no politics. In fact, it was depoliticized, in my opinion. Yeah. And so the reason why they flooded these organizations with millions of dollars, because it was a good investment. And so that's what we are today.
Absolutely. I want to thank you for that analysis. I want to ask you a question more direct to the organization that you are generally seen as the principal leader of, and that's the Black Alliance for Peace. And so you guys are now into your 6th year. I know you've grown rapidly and have chapters around the country. But in terms of what I presume to be your leading project to, are you back?
It looks like it for a minute. So should I hang this up?
Okay. Yeah. Okay, brother. I turned down the phone, so we should be able to just focus on you talking through the thing. So that analysis you put forward, but in terms of Black Alliance for Peace, if the main project is to recapture and redevelop the historic anti-war, anti-imperialist, and pro-peace positions of the radical Black movement, how's that going?
Well, it's going very well, because our objective was narrow. That it was to bring in elements, primarily young folks, who were looking for answers, who were attempting to radicalized themselves, who needed a incubation space, if you will, and to expose them to some of the most advanced material and thinking that we thought was out there, and give them an opportunity to, in fact, engage in experimentation in terms of how we build something and build a real formation. One of the major elements that we need to include when we talk about the Black Alliance of Peace is that at the center of the Black radical tradition is internationalism. So making that connection between the domestic and the international was fundamentally important. We took seriously what Malcolm said and others, that Malcolm said you can't understand Mississippi unless you understand the Congo. You can't understand the Congo unless you understand Mississippi. So that understanding of the global nature, the structural global nature of the enemy, we saw as vitally important. So you can't talk about so-called abolition in the U.S. without relating that to the global system. You can't talk about and pretend that the enemy is going to dismantle its most effective weapons for perpetuating its class rule, which is their so-called criminal justice system, the police and the prisons and the courts and all of that. That basically, if you're not focused on.
Can I interrupt you for a moment? I want you to elaborate. One of the things I always appreciated that y'all do is that you don't talk about the police without also talking about the military. A lot of folks focus on the police as if the U.S. military isn't, quote unquote, the world police.
Exactly. And we refer to the U.S. police as a domestic military. It's a military force. It's an occupation force as we see it. Okay.
Absolutely.
And so you have the domestic army that we call the police, and then you have the military abroad that is enforcing white power, enforcing a colonial capitalist power. And so in this Black Alliance of Peace, we want to lay it out clearly. We don't want any sugar-coated politics. We believe that our people can understand these complex, and actually not even complex that often, these terms, understanding what it is we up against. Understand the nature of capitalism. You can't understand it if you're afraid to talk about it. Right. If you conclude that it's so sophisticated and complex, our people can't understand it. And I tell people all the time, Negro, it ain't our people who ain't ready for that. You ain't ready for it.
That's right. That's right. If you have been a renter, you can understand capitalism.
Exactly. So let's talk about this. We can't afford to perpetuate illusions. Okay. We got to talk about what it is that we are structurally up against. All right. And so, we make those connections, and we were clear that we were trying to help develop a cadre of folks who themselves are supposed to be in contact with the people, who then have the kind of skills, the tools they needed to be more effective organizers. And so we've been very intentional about that. We built this thing the old-fashioned way. We don't get no money. Ain't nobody gonna give us no grants and stuff. We built this from the bottom up. We got a few people that we're able to pay part-time. But we got a formation that was larger than Black Lives Matter was at its height. And we'd have no full-time staff, and all the money that we have, individual donors.
Okay. Now that really raises the ante, that meaning that Black folks are supporting the movement, a radical movement. Yes, that gives hope, brother. That gives hope.
And then we said it clearly in our opinion. We talk about being independent. We talk about supporting our own struggles. And we say, you all know what we're doing. Our record is clear. Now give us some resources to continue. And we've been relatively successful at that. We don't bring a whole lot of money in, but we got enough to do what we need to do. If we had some real money, there's no telling what we can do. But that's That's what we did. So we don't want, you can't, and when we first started doing so, we had a meeting with one of the big funders, and we took the meeting because we just was curious. And, and we ended up having to tell them, look, thank you for the conversation, but we but no, thank you. And they just couldn't understand that at first. Now, we're not saying that, and we got a couple of a little small family,
foundations,
but they run their money through like tithes or whatever. We got a couple of those, we get a few thousand from them, but we ain't getting no money from the OSI, for none of those kind of people, because we're not prepared to make any kind of compromises in our politics. We believe we've got to have a formation out there. We're not the only one. We believe we got to have a formation out there that lays it out the way we see it: clear, unequivocal, revolutionary politics.
Absolutely. That's what's to be appreciated. Now, we've got a few more questions, and I want to get to them before we go to the chat. So, can you put together these next two questions, right? So, one is, Black internationalism, your revolutionary internationalism extends beyond Pan-Africanism, but can you talk briefly about what's happening on the continent in terms of the Pan-Africanism? And I'm, of course, speaking in terms of a more inclusive understanding of movements toward one government, and hopefully that government will be socialist, and the relationship between Africa and the diaspora. And can you also explain why Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela are important for African Americans and U.S. Blacks, and how we and they can collaborate in solidarity of each other?
See, yeah. Well, what we have on the African continent right now is very, very interesting. And what we have right now is, in particular, in West Africa and the Sahel, is the continuation of a process that was somewhat arrested in the 1970s. That is the so-called decolonization process, the movement from straight up colonies to, in effect, what became neo-colonial relationships. But there was some degree of political independence. Now, that process was basically arrested with the French, because you had basically the continuation of the French colonial empire. You had Negroes who called themselves independent, who didn't control their own currency, who basically, it was a pathetic and sad and degrading situation. But as a consequence of the continuation of the pillage of those nations, and the changes in consciousness and the leverage now that some of these nations have as a consequence of the emergence of a China, the assistance, if you will, to a certain extent, of a Russia that because they got expelled from the European family, and they wouldn't let them back in. Now they are basically attempting to pursue their national and do what they need to do to help continue the shift of to alter the balance of forces, the balance of forces, and the shifting from the Europe to the African continent, to Asia, and to Latin America. There's no question about that. Okay, so with this political space, with this leverage, with this leverage, it meant that you can use the instrumentality of the military, because the civil society structures in many of these French nations were so underdeveloped because of repression. Okay, that what occurred, what developed, was that critical consciousness, if you will, was percolating among the military. And so this has been an instrument, it appears, for making certain changes to move them toward a more authentic independence. Now, to what degree this is going to really result in the radicalization of those societies, I think still remains to be seen. But in terms of the experimentation with rebuilding a federation of states, it was very, very significant that when ECOWAS was recruited to carry out the interests of the West, even to the extent
ECOWAS. Who is that? Not everybody on the thing knows.
ECOWAS is the economic. Yeah, we make sure that I get it right too. But
West African
it's the
state.
Economic Association for West African States. Okay, is a economic and political formation theoretically geared toward the development of the various African states. But what it really is just an entry point for European and U.S. capital to continue the exploitation of African people and African resources. So it's an instrument of neocolonialism. So when these various militaries rose up and took state power in Burkina Faso, in Mali, and then in Niger, even though they had already done it in Guinea and other places, it developed like that because that was the instrument that sort of developed because of the underdevelopment of some of the political institutions. Now, there's always been critical consciousness in those various states, but it hasn't always been as well organized as it could have been, primarily because of the repressive nature of those states. So they are now attempting to. So when ECOWAS decided they were going to allow themselves to be used to enter to attack Niger, when Burkina Faso and Mali said attack on Niger would be an attack on us, that pushed it back for a moment.
Yeah.
That was very, very significant, very significant. So that is a very important development on the African continent, and it shows that there is this developing institutional structures that can play a role in helping to support political movements in other parts of the continent that have to, at some point, rise up against this bourgeois, this comprador bourgeoisie that the Europeans put in charge. Okay, and in other words, if we don't have an intensified class struggle on the African continent, then we're not going to be able to take advantage of this moment.
That's right.
That's what we're saying on the African continent. Now, why is that important?
Well, we'll finish that and then get us to Cuba, Venezuela.
I'm gonna connect that because basically what you have is a fight back. You got to fight back on the part of the Western powers, and what they're doing, and that's why we have this campaign in terms of the Black Alliance of Peace, shut down AFRICOM. We are focusing in on the U.S. Africa Command, the instrument that the U.S. has decided they're going to use to try to maintain their hegemony on the African continent. They can't compete with the Chinese economically, so what they have done is to fall back on what they know is the overdevelopment of their military. So they want to use military means to try to maintain their control on the African continent. So we say shut down AFRICOM, kick out NATO. Okay, so the fight back is on the African continent, and is also in Latin America. We're connecting up the African continent and in the so-called Americas, because we say shut down AFRICOM. We also now saying that we want to kick the U.S. out of the Americas. We say U.S. out of the Americas. If you can't live in harmony with the peoples of the Americas, if you continue to subvert governments like Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, Bolivia, then basically you become the target for us, because we're gonna get liberated one way or the other. So we are making those connections between the African continent and the so-called Americas. Now, Venezuela is key, because your listeners probably remember It was the Bolivarian revolutionary process that provided a material base for the development of these progressive movements and eventually governments in the Americas.
That's
Okay.
right.
The U.S. was somewhat preoccupied with the adventures in West Asia, or what they call the so-called Middle East. Okay. We were trying to warn people they're going to make a shift back to the Americas, and their primary target will be Venezuela and Venezuela's oil wealth. Venezuela has actually the largest reserves of petroleum on the planet. Okay.
Whoa.
Yeah, they have more than Saudi Arabia. So basically, they're going to take them offline, and because they wanted to undermine the process in the Americas. People have to remember, you can't understand what's happening in Haiti unless you understand the role that Venezuela played in providing below market fuel to the Haitian people.
Yeah.
Petro Carib, and one of the first things that the U.S. did when they started putting pressure and putting and slapping sanctions on Venezuela was they also forced the Haitians through their puppet government to cease that relationship between itself and Venezuela. So you got Venezuela as key. You got Nicaragua that's developed relatively independent economic and political project in their country that they then began to target also. And of course, you got the continuation of the Cuban process. So from that, you have Bolivia, you have what was developing in Ecuador, you had some progressive developments in Argentina, you got Brazil, even with some of those serious contradictions there with the Workers' Party and Lula. We could talk about that in a moment. But you have a sort of trajectory of progressive development in the America that now can link up what is developing on the African continent. That's a very powerful potential there.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got a couple more questions, and I think what I want to do is just, we would be seriously amiss if we don't engage Palestine. So, one of my favorite novelists is Caleb Carr, and he's put forward a definition of terrorism. And he says that the primary goal of terror as a military strategy and tactic, more than to kill enemy soldiers, is to destroy the will of enemy citizens to support the policies of the enemy government, end quote. And from that point of view, obviously, we know that the U.S., from the moment Jamestown was founded in 1607, has been engaged in a terrorist project, right? But coming to Palestine, we know Israel is, like the U.S., a settler colonialist state. It also has internal colonies. So by definition, they're a terrorist state. If you're a settler colonial state, you're a terrorist state. I mean, that's by definition, right? But Hamas has also engaged in the targeting of civilians, and if you follow Caleb Carr's definition, then we would see that as terrorism. So here's what I want you to do is explain why it would be naive to say a pox on both houses and to treat what Hamas did as equivalent to Israel's terrorism from 1920s down to today as a sub-imperialist client state of the U.S. Or is that a bad analysis?
No. I think that's a good question because there's a lot of confusion among our folks because of the intensification of the propaganda that attempts to sort of, at best, project this both sides argument. This, both sides are engaged in reprehensible behavior or whatever. We don't entertain that. In fact, I hope you can share with your listeners the statement that we put out yesterday for the Black Alliance of Peace. But we said basically that a colonized, occupied people have a fundamental right to to struggle against their oppressor by any means necessary. There will be no Hamas if there was no occupation. Okay. And so, what we saw with Gaza was an attempt to break out of the largest open air prison on the planet. If there was a serious concern about violence in Israel, Palestine, on the part of the Western forces, then they would have put pressure on the Israelis a long time ago to get serious about trying to come up with some kind of resolution of the situation. But they weren't serious because the whole two-state thing was basically some nonsense that was really used to divert away from the real issue, which was basically the continuation of the settler colonial project in Israel. So no, we say that if you want to see the violence stop, you have to demand that these Europeans, this settler colonial state called the U.S. and their Western allies, that they in fact call for a ceasefire. They negotiate honestly. They lift the siege of Gaza, and they begin to move toward a serious discussion about how the people of Gaza and really throughout Israel, Palestine, how Palestinians can assert their fundamental right, their fundamental democratic and people-centered human rights, their right to self-determination, until those issues of the rights of Palestinians are addressed. As long as the Israeli fascists are committed to building and maintaining an apartheid state with the full support of the West, there will be continued struggle because the Palestinians, unless you are able to commit a complete genocide, and believe me, what they seem to be prepared to do right now is going to be is already a monumental criminal assault. Right. A war crime that is so obvious and so ghastly. You wonder how in the world will the Western powers ever pretend to be supporters of international law and to twist up their mouths to utter the words human rights. They have been completely exposed. Their commitment to white supremacy, their commitment to violence, the inability to see reality in the same way as others has exposed why, in our opinion, we see the U.S. As an existential threat to global humanity. Folks, if we don't take power from the white West, we are doomed because these people are committed. They'll rather blow the entire planet up.
There you go.
Or concede power. So they are the biggest threat facing all of us right now. So we don't entertain the conversation about none of this BS about what's happening when they are systematically bombing civilians in Gaza. Oh, no.
Brother, my last question before we go to the chat is, you are an advisor to Dr. Cornell West and his campaign for president. What does he and his campaign seek to accomplish? And how do you think it can contribute to organizing the African-American people for self-determination and the U.S. left for social transformation? And here's where I'm coming from. We know he can't win. And I'm not sure what his objectives are. Like, if he said that he was organizing to make it possible for third parties to get on the ballot in every state, if he was trying to change the laws that make it so that it's winner take all, I could understand that. But other than that, I don't understand it.
Well, let me say this. Yeah, I was part of the conversation that occurred when he made the move from the People's Party to the Green Party. Right. The sort of changes that have been made when he decided to leave the Green Party and to run as a so-called independent, even though the Green Party is an independent movement also. But we decided to abandon that apparatus an apparatus that had the ability to, in fact, get him on a number of ballots across the
45 states,
country.
right?
It sort of undermined the rationale for independent thrust, because like, as you indicated in your question, even that if you enter the electoral politics, bourgeois politics,
Yeah.
if the objective isn't to use your platform to use this arena to build independent organization, to strengthen the radical movement, then why are you doing that?
Right.
So if you are suggesting that you can't submit yourself to the discipline of an organization, that you want to talk directly to the people and all of this, I had to tell everybody, I said, African, the people aren't looking for no saviors. And the only way that we're going to be able to address our needs is we have to have the people have to have agency. How does that happen? Through organization.
Yeah.
Okay. So our dear brother he's a little confused now, and I'm hoping that that he gets on the right track. But I don't know, because he gave a gift, in my opinion, to the Democratic Party, because what made him a threat was that they saw for the first time in years the possibility of an independent radical movement that had the ability also to appeal to working class people, but more specifically to Black working class folks.
That's right.
Okay. And with him being on the ballot in various states, it was going to be seen as a fundamental threat. By him basically undermining his ability to, in fact, do that, they breathed a sigh of relief.
Yeah.
So I can't tell you, brother. I still talk with the brother, but I'm very disappointed, because see, you say he can't win. I'm gonna tell you something, and it might sound a little naive or whatever. With the particular dynamics that are unfolding and would have unfolded in 2024, with the independence run now of Robert F. Kennedy, with the no labels attempt to put a so-called centrist on the ballot in 50 states. To show you how difficult that is, they have budgeted $70 million for that. Okay. Yeah. With the libertarians, with the fact that in the Democrat Party, over 40% of the Democrats said they would consider a third party. There was the possibility of a plurality path to the White House.
If you built on organizations and you had clearly identifiable goals of transformation.
Yes, that is what the campaign was developing. There were people being brought in that was developing all of that. They was developing the apparatus, okay? But the brother, for various reasons he has to tell you, they decided to go another route. And unfortunately, it raises the question of how serious he really was, and how serious he will be. Because if you can't get on the ballots, it's good, you can raise certain kind of questions and all of that. That's important. But in terms of the struggle for power, you've taken yourself out of that equation.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, brother, do you have any last comments before we open up for questions from the chat?
No, I'm looking for that. I'm looking for the questions. That's going to be the fun part. I mean, I enjoy your questions too, but yeah, let's go to the chat.
Absolutely. I've got to look for. Okay, here we go. I apologize. Joshua Ingram has put in Sister Soldier and Daruba bin Wahad versus Cornell West, 1992. You want to respond to that?
Well, there's that video that's circulating now again of an exchange between Sister Soldier and Cornell. Daruba was part of that panel also, but it sort of indicated that our dear brother was, his politics were, Sister Soldier was sort of addressing what she would characterize as some of his liberal inclinations. And so that has resurfaced as part of the questioning of the brother. Now, I don't think that his sincerity was a question for me up until recently. I think that the disastrous decision he made, and he is his decision. He says very clearly, and I believe him, that it was a decision that he made himself. And I know he did that because a few of us who were supposed to be part of the internal sort of brain thrust, we knew nothing about it until it was announced. Okay. So, it suggested that, some people were trying to suggest that this is like part of his whole internal character, but he made the decision based on his own assessment. I don't completely understand it. I think he made a terrible mistake, but I don't smear the brother. I think he has a lot of good qualities, but that coming out of the movement, that understanding of what it takes for people to engage in movement, to develop movement, develop structures of resistance. He made some terrible mistakes.
Yes, it seems like it. Okay. Well, it's interesting. I always had this problem. People don't necessarily ask a lot of questions, but it's the Cornell West piece, and I think you've covered it, and so I don't want to go back to that.
Maybe people can reformulate now that we had this conversation and come up with some new questions.
Yeah, please,
see what was there.
Please put in some questions for Brother Ajamu, something that he hasn't been able to address thus far.
Well, as people formulate questions, let me talk about something I do want to talk about and make a connection. We've been talking about Palestine, which is important. We need to talk more about what is unfolding also in Haiti with the pending military assault on Haiti, primarily engineered by the U.S. as an attempt to undermine the fight for democracy in Haiti. They engage in a very carefully crafted campaign to give the impression that the Haitians could not govern themselves, that this violence that was unfolding was just another reflection of how uncivilized they were, and that what was needed was the strong hand of external force. But all of that was, as I said, a carefully constructed narrative to provide the rationale for imposing on the Haitian people a military force that would ensure that nothing changed in Haiti, that the same corrupt bourgeoisie that's been running Haiti for decades would continue. And so, but the Haitian people have said, when you introduce this force, and people might remember that they went all the way to the African continent and got the Kenyans who were going to insert 1,000 troops until their constitutional court said that it was illegal for them to do that. But if they get past that, they're going to use these Kenyans to insert them into this volatile situation in Haiti. And the Haitian people have said, you bring the troops in from the outside, we're going to fight them. Okay. And it's important for us to be prepared to support whatever goes down in Haiti. We're trying to prevent it. We have appealed directly to the Chinese and the Russians to veto the resolution to give the cover of the UN to this invasion. They did it the first time. The second time, for reasons that only they can answer for, they decided to abstain. Okay. So we want people to follow this situation very, very closely because you have the first expression, my brother, of what I call neoliberal Pan-Africanism, because it's framed the use of Kenya is being framed as some kind of rescue mission, some helpful intervention on the part of another African nation. But no, this is imperialism is under this at the bottom of this, and that has to be absolutely clear.
Okay, brother, I appreciate you bringing that up. Like you said, that's got to be on our radar. Okay, here's a kind of standard question that I hear a lot, and it's from Mark Milner, and it goes like this. I heard an African man talk about the Chinese strategy for taking over Africa, and that it is for Chinese men to create mixed babies with African women. Any thoughts?
That name is, to me, not in a serious. I mean, there's so many complex things on the African continent. I mean, come on. So
treat it, ignore the baby thing, but treat it as the argument that's out there that China is trying to colonize Africa differently than the Europeans colonized it.
Look, the Chinese have their own particular interests. There's no question about that. But they pursue what they call a win-win relationships. And various African nations have engaged in that relationship, and it's provided them some degree of leverage to the slavery that most of these states were experiencing vis-a-vis the West. If you couldn't secure a loan from the International Monetary Fund, then you couldn't get access to the World Bank, and you couldn't get access to private foreign capital. You were basically at the mercy of the West to continue to plunder your resources, to set prices, et cetera, et cetera. So even within the context of capitalism, the rise of China and the ability of these nations to have some degree of space
Option
to pursue economic development in a different kind of way, it's the only way you can explain the relatively the development that we've seen on the African continent in the last 20 years.
That's right.
If it wasn't for the Chinese, I guess people are look. Those of us who've been on the African continent, I guess people don't realize how I don't think I can cuss it, but how messed up the African continent was.
Yeah,
it still is.
Europeans left it bare. No infrastructure.
It was being stripped.
Yeah.
You know? And so they don't know what they're talking about. Okay. So yeah, we all want pride. We want Africa to be independent. But this notion that the Chinese are engaged in an insane kind of colonization that these Europeans engaged in, that destroyed our continent, that resulted in millions of people being murdered.
Right.
What is this? Come on, it's not even serious.
Yeah. You know? Yeah. But it's a sentiment that's out there by, of course, those who don't study. Brother, it's been wonderful. I've learned a lot. The audience has, and it's a shame, but I've learned. My producer says if I don't stick to the time that I publish, then I encourage anarchy. Right. So and we're about organization. So come to that moment. And again, thank you so much for coming on the show. And it's been wonderful.
Well, look, I thank you.
See in the comments.
I thank you. I salute you. I salute the work you've been involved in and your long-standing presence in building our movement, and more importantly, building the kind of revolutionary intellectuals and activists we've got to build. So it's an honor to be with you, my brother.
Thank you, brother. So I'm going to take you out now. I'm going to take myself out and play the ending. Credit.